Last week, I received communications from a few people indicating that they had issues with a place called Gateway Center in Atlanta. They presented themselves, they had a crisis situation where they were homeless, and for some reason, they weren't offered the assistance that they hoped for. So at that moment, I gave the CEO of Gateway Center a call. We had a very in-depth conversation. As a result of that conversation, I decided to have a detailed interview and let you guys hear exactly what's going on at the Gateway Center in Atlanta. Good morning, Raphael Holloway. How are you, sir?
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for having me this morning. I'm doing well.
Great, great, great. Well, obviously, the reason for my call, let me let the audience know exactly what's happening here, right? So we got a call from a young lady who presented at your facility, which is Gateway Center. And for some reason, she was not offered the relief that she was looking for that particular day. She happened to run into me on the street and wanted to do a story about Gateway Center. Now, I pride myself in being um, resourceful, but also being thorough as I put out a story. I need to make sure that I hear all sides as relates to accusations and all of these sort of things. So I called you, and then you and I had a very in-depth conversation about not only this particular this particular young lady's situation, but many others, and also the misinformation out there in regards to funding that everybody believes that Gateway Center has received. And so they're looking for all of this help from you. So let's start there.
Again, thank you for the opportunity. And again, thanks for that conversation the other day. I really appreciated that we had the conversation and it's led us here. Gateway Center is a homeless service center located in South Downtown. We operate out of 3 locations. We provide what I call short-term residential services. HUD will have us call it shelter. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is the use of language. I don't use the term shelter specifically because the moment I say shelter, you think of a space with just rooms and maybe a bunch of beds in it, and more like kind of the soup kitchen sort of model. Gateway Center, being a homeless service center, provides a number of wraparound and supportive services that range from not only just the coaching case management services, mental health, substance abuse services. We also provide job training. We have a federally qualified health clinic on site at our main location that provides people access not only to healthcare services, but also to dental. We also meet people with just basic needs. Everyone that comes to Gateway is not looking for a short-term residential or a bed. Sometimes they're just looking to get their basic needs met. And we do that through providing showers, washer and laundry services, washer and dryers, access to washer and dryers, simple things as restrooms that people might not realize that's important to have access to as well, our clothing closet. And then we have an array of volunteer groups that come on site and help support our services through the provision of meals, haircuts, sometimes massages, manicures, pedicures, you name it. We try to allow for Gateway to be a space and place for people to connect, not only with services, but reconnect back with community. Annually, we serve over 7,000 people a year through our overall services. But in addition, we provide about 1,000 individuals a year with that short-term residential services through our 3 sites. On any given night, we have 500 beds of short-term residential housing available, and our occupancy rate tends to be around 95% occupied on any given night. As you can imagine, those 500 beds aren't enough, to meet the needs of everyone. And there are other providers, obviously, throughout our city. But that's a kind of short glimpse at who we are. We do put our work into 5 buckets. We look at our work through our 5 keys of success, which is getting people housed. So immediately working to get people into shelter and through the coordinated entry process to start working on that long-term housing solution. Next, we try to work on medical, which includes not only, like I said, getting connected to healthcare services, but for some people, getting them connected to substance abuse treatment or other mental health supports. And then third, once people are stabilized, feeling better, we try to get people back to work or connected to their entitlement benefits. Because as you know, everyone isn't able to necessarily rejoin the workforce. Fourth, we try to work with people to get reconnected to community, either through volunteerism, um, reconnecting with their family, or just being engaged at some level, recognizing that Gateway is a temporary and short-term stay. So how do we ensure that people, again, are being reconnected and building their social networks up more during that time while they're with us? And finally, that fifth bucket, or that fifth key to success, is our literacy, and that's financial literacy and also our adult literacy. We recognize that oftentimes people have not had the benefit of had financial planning, really understanding banking and how money works. And so we try to provide those services as individuals are getting back employed or getting their entitlement benefits and trying to manage a household, which can be very tough when you have limited income coming in. And then also the adult literacy program, working with a number of different providers, is because we have found that a lot of our guests that come to us are oftentimes reading on the fifth grade level or less. And so it's important to try to address the adult literacy issue, working with Atlanta Public Schools and their adult ed program to get the men and women that we serve connected in a way that not only builds their own self-confidence by obtaining their GED or improving their literacy, but also creates more employment opportunities through that increase of literacy as well. So that's a kind of general overview of who we are and what we provide.
Most Americans, and I'm not even going to make it specific to Atlanta, I'm just going to the whole country, are one or two paychecks away from homelessness, right?
Absolutely.
If you're spending 75 to 80% of your wages in housing, and then you have 20% left to do everything else, and you have kids, and you have a car and insurance and food and all of the other expenses that most American families have. The argument that I've heard out in the public that there's a lack of accountability for these homeless people and they're derelict, and they need to stop making excuses and pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. I don't know that that is an accurate assessment on people who find themselves in this particular plight, because I've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of homeless people, and you would be surprised what their stories are. There is a thing called the working poor. There are people who work every single day and can't make ends meet. So in your experience, and you spoke to it a few seconds ago, but what is the group of people or demographics that present there at your center in the metro area?
Absolutely. And you raise great points. One is that people aren't monolithic, right? So who presents at Gateway? It's a range of individuals. And none are lazy. They have just had different life circumstances that have caused them to come through our doorway, ranging from, yes, do we have a percentage of our community that are dealing with mental health and substance abuse issues? Yes, but that is oftentimes embellished a bit in the sense that only 50% of our a little less than 50% of our population are dealing with mental health, and a smaller percentage is dealing with severe mental health. But I would challenge community to say, if you were displaced, you were unhoused, how would your mental health be? I have volunteer groups that come through all the time, and I talk to them about, imagine just being without your cell phone, something simple, something that would cause you a bit of anxiety just leaving it at home for the day. So imagine not having a home. And so it's oftentimes, I think we forget what comes first, right? Oftentimes it's the trauma, it's the displacement, and then the mental health intensifies. It becomes more challenging the longer the people are out of their home. The other thing is the bootstrap reference, right? There's an assumption that everyone has bootstraps. There's an assumption that people have not been plagued by the systemic and structural racism that still exists in our country. And this isn't an Atlanta only issue, it's in our country. There's a reason why Atlanta is 50% Black, or just a little bit over, depending on what stats you look at. But our homeless population is 90% Black and predominantly men of color. Why is that? we have to ask some questions. And there are the systemic issues associated with our justice system and how poor people, I'm not even going to say Black people, how poor people are oftentimes treated in our in our justice system. The reality of, I talked about literacy as it relates to oftentimes the education and kids getting to the proper early learning supports that they get to third grade ready to learn, and we know what the outcomes associated with that. The reality that 60+% of Americans nationally, to your point, are 1 to 2 paychecks away from a crisis, and the reality that a lot of people don't have the social supports. Excuse me. Everyone doesn't always have the network to say, if I had a rough moment, then I have someone to support me. So who comes through our door often are individuals who have worked in food industry, hospitality, warehousing, or other kind of hourly positions. They oftentimes had a decrease in hours that were provided by the employer. They may have even had a medical issue that they were trying to address. And in many of these jobs, we have to remember these people don't have paid time off. So that's a luxury that some are afforded that many are not. And when you don't have PTO, you start to miss hours. It becomes very difficult to catch up. Then couple that with the lack of housing affordability, that inventory that we have in the city. If we even are just talking rental properties, when I give people the example of Buckhead and the Lenox Mall area, right? Most of there's a lot of hospitality, beautiful restaurants, and a lot of places for people to go and indulge, correct? But the people who work there, where do they live? They can't live or afford to live close to where they work. And that's the reality for many of us, that transportation, that drive, and the lack of transportation resources to get to work, or just the sheer cost of transportation to get to work, causes most people that we are seeing to have previously been in a situation where they're not able to spend 30% of their income, which is the recommended amount of income that you're supposed to spend towards your housing. They're spending upwards of 80% of their income. And if you stay at that pace, it is very difficult to maintain that. And then for those that are renting, rents increase. And for some, it may feel like it's a small amount by raising rents $100 or $200. But for those that are trying to survive, that could be catastrophic to their ability to maintain. And then that cycle, to your point of who comes to the door, begins where people don't have the resource. They try to survive. Oftentimes, they have been staying in their cars, maybe even couch surfing. Those resources have become depleted. And then now they're at a point of trying to seek shelter or some kind of other housing alternative.
You know, I find it interesting that a lot of people who say things that are kind of negative as it relates to people who are homeless, um, they don't have empathy because they've never dealt with this situation before. And as you say, their lifestyles are a lot different than many others. But oftentimes, you don't have empathy until you require empathy, right?
Correct.
I'll say it this way. Last year, I had the unfortunate opportunity to meet 50 displaced families in Cobb County as a result of a fire that fire happened in the complex. Next thing you know, they are all displaced. And there's this misnomer about all of these agencies that come forward and give you credit cards and give you assistance and put you in hotels. Well, I can tell you that didn't happen. These people had about 1 or 2 nights of stay, maybe 1 or 2 nights of food, and that was it. That was it. So going back to your point about infrastructure in place, a lot of these people didn't have infrastructure in place. 1 or 2 out of the 50 people that I talked to had family members that supported them in this crisis. Many others were sleeping in your car, in their cars, as you noted. And I went to the county and I asked for assistance for these people. They couldn't help. They didn't have any funding in place to help. And so we took it upon ourselves as a company to raise food, money and clothing for these people. Now, I make this point because it's real simple. A lot of these people were part of the working poor that I was just referring to.
Mhm.
They worked, they had jobs. They could not afford the renter's insurance that was required where they lived. And so therefore, when an accident like this that happened through no fault of their own, it was a fuse box that actually caught them on fire.
Mhm.
And there you have it. They're all gone. And this has happened about almost a year ago, and these people are still homeless at this point. So my point to this whole thing is homelessness can happen at any time because who really is prepared for that?
Correct.
Who's prepared for that? So I don't like the fact that people make this blanket statement about who the homeless person or family is. It's not always somebody that's irresponsible. It's not always somebody who lacks accountability. It's not always somebody who's lazy and looking to make excuses and take money from the government. It's not always the case. As you noted, there are people that we know that look like us that do that. So I'm not making excuses for that. But in whole, the totality of the people you see and the people that I talk to are very responsible people who unfortunately found themselves in a situation that they had very little support in. Whose responsibility is it when one becomes homeless? Is it the city's responsibility, the state, the federal government, or that person themselves, or a combination of it all?
I think it's the latter. I think it's the combination of all. I think that, the federal government obviously makes investment, and they're making investment to multiple jurisdictions across this country. Then state government and city governments do their best also to raise additional revenues, oftentimes with a high dependency on the federal dollars that come in. But it's also just community, right? At some point, as community, and I'll say the Atlanta community, we have to decide what is the minimum level of housing that we want for all people, simply put. Then when we set that North Star, what this is the minimum level of housing that we believe all people should have, then how do we work towards that? And that will require compromise, that will require not maybe on some situations earning as much for a resource that you provide for a housing resource. It would also require the individual to take some steps to meet the requirements or those kind of things. But how do we have a healthy mix, right? What is that healthy mix that we as community are clear around what we want for each other? And right. And so that's part of the challenge. There's a report a couple years ago that was shared with me from the Atlanta Regional Commission, and it talked about how families were bigger in the 40s and 50s with smaller homes, and now in the 2000s we have these bigger homes and smaller families. So it's our land use, it's the inflation, it's what is our will and commitment to each other. We've become a little bit more divided. One of the things I loved about Atlanta when I first moved here 25 years ago, and even just growing up, was a sense of community, right? And it still has that. Atlanta's it's a little big town, right? But in some ways, the way our neighborhoods are even structured, they're not even structured in the same way where people know their neighbor. And so it starts there. It starts with, yes, there is a benefit of having blood relatives, but there's this thing that, called fictive kin that we, especially in communities of color, have always had, where you had the play aunts and the play uncles because you just had a love for one another because you spent that time, you were connected, and you wanted to see that person do well, and equally they wanted to see you do well, and you build your family out. And so the more we can build our circles of influence and our levels of connectedness, I think that is what it requires, and that's who's responsible. It's kind of like that movie Waiting on Superman. No one is going to fly in and save us, right? It's up to us. And I think community has demonstrated that before, especially here in the Atlanta area when they were with the civil rights movement and that history, that rich history that we have here. And it's going to take that same level of fearlessness and courageousness to make a change. And I think we have a real opportunity here in our city to demonstrate to others what can be done for ensuring that all individuals have access to housing, but also more importantly, not more important, but equally as important, that people are able to retain their housing. Because the best solution to dealing with homelessness and preventing people from experiencing it is that they're able to sustain the housing that they have. And so how do we do that on top of increase the inventory that's necessary for people to have affordable options?
Now, let's deal with the big elephant in the room.
Yes, sir.
Recently, people heard Mayor Andre Dickens of Atlanta state that there was a lot of money that was given to different organizations for affordable housing and all of this such. Your organization was a recipient, I believe, of some $90,000 or some number close to that. And you could, correct me if I'm wrong. And then a lot of people looked at that to say, well, I went to Gateway. They did not give me anything. They're getting all this money and I want them defunded. What do you say to that?
As I shared, we serve anywhere upwards of 150 to 200 people a day, 7,000 people annually. The funds that we receive, so we are serving people. And I want to get to that kind of those that we might not have served in the way that they would have liked to have been served, right? So we received several $100,000 from the city of Atlanta, which was executed by again Mayor Andre Dickens. That 700,000 was not for new programming. That 700,000 supported one of our existing program sites, which I mentioned we operate sheltering or short-term residential out of 3 locations. That 700,000 supported our Evolution Center program, which we did not have funding for. That program is a 100-bed, low-barrier shelter facility that, again, is one of the few true low-barrier facilities in our city, which is a challenge for people who are experiencing homelessness, not having low-barrier facilities. And for those that don't understand, low-barrier basically means come as you are. You don't have to have a level of sobriety. We just want you to be safe at the site. You don't have to have ID. We work on getting your TB test and all those kind of things after you're into the program. And there's a lot of flexibility because it requires a level of adjustment. Whereas in some programs, you have to, agree to case management. You have to have ID. You have to have your TB before you enter. You have to be sober when you enter. And so this program allows for individuals to kind of grow into those other things, but they can kind of just really come as they are and still, if they so choose, get the additional supports on site. So that site still has case management, job training, and other services, but you opt in to those if that's what you choose. So that's what those funds were for. And what happened with the press conference and the news releasing the several $100,000, the assumption was that it was $700,000 of like relief funds. So to help people with rents, paying for hotel stays, or whatever the case may be. The assumption was that 1, that 700,000 was for that, but then 2, that that community, everybody wants their share, and it's an assumption that there's enough that even if it was for that purpose, that we could serve everyone. I think I shared with you when we spoke. There's an entire continuum of services in the city. Gateway is not the sole provider of services in Atlanta. We do our part, and I think we do our part well. But it is important, regardless of if we think we have done well, we need to listen. And so that was what I was excited about when we had the opportunity to speak, because there's always a lesson in everything, whether if it's success or what I don't like to say failures, but I call them opportunities. The opportunity to learn and do better, because in the scenario where individuals say they weren't served, oftentimes it's the language we use that the individual was served, they just didn't get the resource or access to the resource that they wanted. And oftentimes it's out of our control. In many cases, it's other facilities. So give you an example. We have a small women and children's program that houses 7 heads of households. 3 can be families, and then 4 individual women, right? So it's a small program that we have. Those 3 family units that we have are typically full every time. As soon as someone is moving out, someone's moving in. What happens is then we refer to our community partners, and family shelter is pretty difficult to access in the city because of just the low amount of spaces available. And so we are seeing more uh, heads of households, mother-led households, female-led households with large family groups. And that is a citywide issue that we're having to have conversations around, like how do we support these families better? And so what happens, Gateway is the starting point for most people to come to what's called coordinated entry. We do the assessment and we get you in what's called the housing queue. That housing queue is managed by an organization called Partners for Home. And they, from that score, that assessment, match you with housing resources. There's some steps you have to take to do that. So it's not immediate and it takes time, which is also a problem. If I'm in survival mode and I need housing, I want housing now. I don't necessarily want to go through the process of the wait, but unfortunately or fortunately, that's what our system is. On top of that, then we start the process of where can we get you for the evening while you have this wait, right? Is it shelter? Is it hotel? Or what resource? Or can we call a family member that might let you stay there? Oftentimes with families specifically, well, not just families. Oftentimes, I'll stick with families. With families, because there are limited providers that provide family shelter, it becomes very difficult. And to your point of empathy, I can't help but empathize if I'm a mom or a dad with a child or multiple children, and I don't know where we're going to stay for the night. And I go to this place that someone probably referred them and said, hey, go to Gateway, they'll help you, right? But you didn't get the help you needed. Like maybe we're only able to say for those partners that we can call, we called, they don't have space. And then there are other providers where you have to go and line up and hope that they might have space for the night. That, in that case, is not the help that that person probably was looking for that day. And so I do empathize with that. But that's where we become the kind of the bearer of the weight of the negativity associated with that, even though it's oftentimes out of our control.
Gotcha. You know, this is a very complex situation. Um, and it's so prolific just downtown, just right around your office. I've seen people line up. I mean, it's awful to see the amount of people who are displaced. I'm sure that COVID had a lot to do with this, but it just seems to be increasingly getting worse and worse and worse. And we're putting a Band-Aid on something that requires heart surgery. You know, I mean, that it's that deep of a problem. Tell me what has been, and this is my last question for you, the worst case you've seen, and then what are some of the successes you've seen?
It saddens me to say that there's been a lot of cases that could qualify for worst case, right? You just hate that that's even a reality in this country. But I would say there's two that stand out for me. And one is a little bit more recent. One that stands out is when you have a situation where there's a mother of five, and you see the kids ranging from, in some cases, well, in this case, 6 months up to 10 years of age as the range of the kids. And for me, it's when I met the family before they said anything, it's almost like you don't need to say anything. No, kids shouldn't be on the streets. Just ultimately for me, that's just for me. That's the worst for me is anytime I see kids on the street. I think it's horrible for any human being to be on the street, but the worst for me are kids, and kids that look like me. That is very, very difficult for me always. Every time I have that scenario, we just had a recent family where that was the case, and the mom was just under 30 years of age, 5 kids, no resources, family members had passed away to different illnesses, and she was alone. And had been working in retail, forget what store, but just can't make ends meet, and that's heartbreaking. Um, we're working with her to get into some housing. So luckily, on this particular night, um, we have a space that we use as our chapel space because there are so many um, individuals in need. We've actually opened up our chapel space as an emergency shelter for families when we can't refer anywhere. And it's not an ideal setting, but we can use it as a place to get people out of the elements um, until we can get them somewhere else. And with this family, they're in the process of getting, but that to me is the worst. Seeing kids, and then the other a few years ago was just a gentleman, double amputee, um, and just finding affordable housing that's ADA wheelchair accessible was tough. A lot of units aren't built for wheelchair accessibility, and just him having the fight to go forward, but having struggled with finding a solution for him, though he stayed with us at Gateway and being turned down oftentimes. It's difficult to watch people do what they're supposed to do and not be able to still take the leap. They're doing, putting in the time, putting in the work. One of the things I take pride at our site, we don't have your room is your room at Gateway at all of our program sites. We don't have a lineup at 6 and out by 6 scenario. Your room is your room. And even though our terms are like 3 months, if you're working your program, you stay with us as long as you need to. This gentleman was with us a little over a year because of getting the income in place and then trying to find an appropriate ADA unit for him was tough. But then the third piece of that was sad for me was, I don't say it's just disheartening, is that because of not being able to find a unit, it was turning into a situation where he was almost going to choose somewhere that was unsafe to live just to be able to have housing. And it shouldn't be that way, right? It shouldn't be that to find accessible and affordable means that I got to compromise on safety. So for me, those are kind of two scenarios that stand out and also motivate me to be an advocate to try to ensure that as we talk about getting housing solutions for people, that not only should they be affordable, they should be safe and accessible. And then also the work that we do in collaborating with other partners in the city around how are we going to address our families, because to your point of feeling like there's more people, I definitely think that we're seeing more families. It feels that way anecdotally to me. We recently have completed our point in time count for the city of Atlanta, and so I'm interested to see what the data tells us, but there's a lot of work to be done to better support families in our city and to better support those that are, like you said, are working poor. And that ranges a gamut of individuals. We have seen more people that are in the profession of teachers, bank tellers, and others coming to our doors needing assistance because they have lost their home and are now experiencing homelessness. So there's a lot of work to be done.
What can we as a community do to help assist you? How does the private sector get involved? Because as I said earlier, I see this problem only getting worse. There's only so much money that the mayor can give you. There's only so much money that the governor can give you. There's only so much money that the president can give you. Once we reach capacity with all those funds, then what? What can be done from the outside sector to help alleviate some of the stress that you all are experiencing?
Absolutely. We have a saying, a mantra that we have of everybody versus homelessness, because the reality is it's going to take everyone. And so whatever you believe your time, talent, or treasures are, we would love to have a conversation and see where we can implement that. As I mentioned earlier, volunteers play a significant role in our organization's success and ability to provide. We work with a number of different groups. So it's not always monetary, right? It's not always money, right? It's oftentimes it's raising awareness in your community where you're living. We have a group that comes from the North Fulton area, and they have the woman there has mobilized her community to better understand that, hey, we live in North Fulton, but downtown and the individuals experiencing homeless downtown are still connected to us. And so they have drives for blankets or different just items that are used for our outreach team or given out in our clothing closet. We have different ministry groups that come in and provide meals, and it's bigger than the meal, right? Sometimes it's the conversation. It's that seeing the person, the fact that you see them, you treat them as a human being, you treat someone with respect. It could change a person's trajectory. It changes how they can manage that day to day. So we just, to help us, in short, just come down, contact us, let us know how you would like to be involved. Let's try to coordinate something together, and whatever that looks like, I know that it will have a meaningful impact to those that we serve.
So if you will, give us information for those who want to contact you to help support your efforts. Just let us know how you can be reached.
Sure. The easiest way to contact us is at gatewayctr.org. Hit the volunteer tab. We have opportunities for individuals or groups. Also, I like to emphasize that young people, I am very much a promoter of getting our young people involved. The more that they see and know and appreciate not only what they have, but start their philanthropy early through their giving of their service and time is important. So again, gatewayctr.org, hit that volunteer tab, or if you like, you can hit the donation tab if you want to give a monetary gift. But if you like to connect with us, learn more, see how you can be engaged, would love to have you and see what we can do together.
Well, Raphael, we certainly appreciate your time. And again, I thought it was very important to have a in-depth conversation about the problem because, I've seen you take the hits in the media, and sometimes the narrative is not always right, especially as it relates to our community and people of color. I mean, it just is what it is. And so, again, I appreciate your time, and I hope that this will give people a little bit more insight on not only the plight of homeless people, but your situation and how you guys are at the max as it relates to the resources that you currently have available.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for this opportunity to come and just have a conversation. And for those that just even want to have a conversation about what they see, again, they can reach out through our website. Love to take the time. I know that we don't always get it right, and so I don't want to leave anyone from have anyone leave this conversation thinking that we think we're perfect. No, we're not. But we're always willing to learn. We're always trying to be our best. We do have a number of success stories of individuals who have started their own businesses, individuals who have gone on. We have one of the biggest successes that oftentimes some of our guests become employees with Gateway and give back through that way and become employees. So there are a number of success stories. We have this week has been very exciting. The container home community opened up, had its groundbreaking last week, and we have guests moving in over there. We have about 7 guests moving into those 40 units. Why that's exciting, of the 40 units, 32 are ADA accessible. And so to have an intentional community develop for people who were formerly homeless or experiencing homelessness that is intentional around the ADA issue that we're seeing with a lot, and that it's affordable for those that are moving there. It shows promise, and I'm excited about that. Is 40 enough? No. But is 40 a start? Absolutely.
I think it's amazing because one thing that I've noticed with the people that I've had the opportunity to speak with, and I'm speaking about homeless folks, is that they lack hope and they lack faith. And without those two things, the prognosis is not good. And so you guys are at least providing hope. And from hope, they can then gain faith. And then from faith, they can build their own self and then come back to the point of pulling themselves up with their own bootstraps because now they have bootstraps to pull from.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you. Blessings.
Blessing to you as well.